welcome back to the Other Side of 45 podcast. I'm your host, Randy Black. This podcast is about taking chances, owning my mistakes, addressing generational and family trauma and curses, completing my 50/50s by 50 list, my life as a single empty nester, and inviting others who have similar backgrounds to share their story. If this is your first time listening, welcome. Please subscribe and rate this podcast 5 stars. This episode, I'm going to expand on the topic I discussed last week, but from the perspective of how it affected my family. So last week, I talked about how the cult wanted me to have these perfect children during the meetings, and what great lengths I went through and how guilty I felt about what I had done. So now I'm going to flip that and tell you how it affected my family. If you're a regular listener, you know about last week and you know how much I love my children. And I try to be a good parent, although there are memories, like I said, that plague me to this day, but there are others that I am actually proud of. And I'm going to talk about that today. And it took me some time. It took me some time and adjustment to find my parenting style. And I knew that I didn't want my children to grow up fearing me. I wanted us to have a relationship that made them feel safe. I wanted my home to be a soft place to fall because I didn't have that growing up. Home was not a soft place to fall for me. My grandparents' house was my soft place to fall. I can say that for me and my children, no matter where we were living, our home was a soft place to fall. I wanted to get that out early because my last episode was entitled, Yes, I Was a Bad Mother. And the reason why I felt that way is because I failed in many ways with my children, unintentionally, but a failure nonetheless. Logically, I know that as a parent that I didn't live up to all my expectation nor that of my children, and that is to be expected. We're going to have those times that we do not live up to our expectations. I know that, but that doesn't negate the fact that I feel guilty. I feel guilty because I feel like my children deserve better, and my fails had an impact on their lives. There's no way around it. I don't believe my children didn't grow up to be wonderful human beings. They are great people. I just wish that I had fewer fails. And like I said at the beginning of my podcast, always, I am owning my mistakes. I am sharing with you the mistakes that I made. And if that can help somebody, great. So on the heels of last week, I'm going to tell you about discussing my parenting style with my family. First, my twin sibling. Our children were very close in age. My youngest and her son are 2 months apart. And we lived together with the children when the children were very young, basically raising them as siblings. It was easier that way because we were both working single parents. I saw how she was raising my nephew while he was in my care. And I saw how she was raising my nephew. And when he was in my care, I mirrored that. Now, there was an incident in which she was caring for my children. And when I returned, she shared with me something that one of the girls had done. And her discipline of choice that day was a spanking. Now, as she retold the story, in my opinion, she seemed to take delight from hitting my child. I knew then that when she did hit one of the girls, I don't even remember which girl it was, to be honest with you, and I don't remember what happened. I knew that it wasn't excessive because that was not the type of person she was then nor now. So, but I mentioned that to her, and it actually came out kind of spontaneously. I didn't even give it any much thought. It was like she was retelling the story, and I was like, man, in my mind I was thinking, man, she seems to be very happy about this, and it kind of just blurted out. And the way she reacted, she said, I will never hit your children again. And she never did. I don't remember exactly when I decided that spanking or hitting my children was no longer going to happen. But I do remember discussing it with my children. Let's be clear. Spankings was never, even before I made a decision, was never a regular form of discipline ever. It just wasn't something that I did regularly. My children would spend days, weeks, months without ever being hit or spanked. It wasn't my preferred method of discipline, but it did happen. It was very occasional. It was on very few occasions, but it did happen. So when I decided that spanking was no longer going to be an option, I talked to the girls about it. I mean, they were young, and so I'm thinking maybe around early elementary grades. And I talked to the girls and I said, no more spankings. And they were excited. I was like, okay, mommy. I don't even know if they really fathomed, what we were talking about. But I gave it a shot, and I spoke in a language that they could understand, in a way that they could understand. And I remember saying to the girls, I said, it doesn't mean I can't. I just don't want to. And we talked about different ways that they can be disciplined. Yes, you guys. It's an actual conversation about the best ways to discipline them. They had a part in that. They were involved in the conversation, and I felt good about it. And I will tell you this. I had that conversation with them when they were very young. And then as they got older, we had the conversation again when it was like, okay, now what are we going to do? What works? And I'm going to tell you what worked for one did not work for the other. And so as the girls got older, I disciplined them differently because I had conversations with my children. So for an example, my youngest does not like yelling. She shuts down. It does not work for her. And when she shared that with me, I said, okay, I will not yell. I am a yeller. I yell. My oldest and I will yell back and forth. And 5 minutes later, she'll be like, you want to go for a walk? That's our thing. I have different types of relationships with the girls. So with my oldest and I discuss everything when she's home through walking. We would spend hours walking around the neighborhood, walking up and down the street, just talking. That was how we communicated. Whereas my youngest was different. Our communication style is different. We do things together, and that's how we get connected. We find activities, and that's what we do. So just like our communication styles are different, when they were growing up, the discipline as they got older was different. Like I said, my oldest and I, we would yell at each other, never cursing because I don't curse. And then immediately afterwards, we would be cool. We can get it out. That's our style. My youngest, not so much so. Hers was still, we need to talk about it. That's what worked with her. So anyway, so I started them out very young, and that's why they felt comfortable when they got older, that we revisited the subject of discipline, and we changed based on who they were at that time. Anyway, back to when they were little though. My siblings though, they were very supportive of the no hitting. I don't think that my oldest sibling ever hit my children. She doesn't have any children. She was a fun auntie. I don't think she ever hit him. So when I said I wanted to do it, she was like, whatever, okay. My twin, same thing. I'm not saying she never hit my nephew, but that also wasn't her go-to method. So we were basically on the same page. Now, my extended family, on the other hand, not so much. What's interesting is my mother didn't really use a rod of discipline with my children. So I was surprised at her reaction. Now, it could be that she thought it was okay for her not to use a rod of discipline because she's their grandmother. But as a parent, deciding not to use a rod of discipline would be detrimental to the girls, because I'm going to tell you, she was not on board. Okay? She was hot with me. Now, I've got a million stories to tell you about how no matter how I raised my kids, regardless of what it was, discipline or anything I want to do for them, she 99.999% of the time disagreed with it. I raised my kids in the exact opposite way of what she wanted me to do, and she was vocal about it. Okay, anyway, like I said, I don't know how she felt, but I just know she wasn't on board. Now, the other people in my family thought I was crazy. They were very vocal about that. They were like, "You crazy? Your children are going to be horrible." However, there was one other person in my family, other than my siblings. Just understand, my siblings were fine. There was one other person in my family that I'll never forget, and she has since passed away. And I have the best memory of her. My last time I spoke to her was a great memory. At a time when I needed allies in my family, she was just that. She was my grandmother's sister, my great aunt. She came to South Carolina from New York to visit my grandmother. So we of course went to South Carolina to be with my aunt. We hardly ever got a chance to see her, so brought the kids up South Carolina, and I wanted to see her again. And we were all at my grandmother's house catching up, so the children were in a different room than the adults. Whenever we would bring the kids to South Carolina to visit, my cousins would bring their children to play with my children so they can get to know their cousins. So picture this as a house full of young kids playing in a room with no adults. They were laughing loudly, they were playing. To me, it was a beautiful noise, the sounds of happy children. Apparently, though, not everyone liked the sound of happy children. So we were sitting in the dining room, talking to my aunt, the adults, and the kids were loud in the other room, but there was no one crying, nothing was broken. In my opinion, seemingly a good situation all around. Well, one of my relatives was getting irritated and was expressing how irritated they were getting with the loud noise from the children. Now, during the course of the conversation, that relative mentioned that the children were getting too loud and they wanted it to stop. I was like, they're getting on my nerves. It was like, they need to shut up. They didn't. And I interjected and I said, you know what? I'll go ask them to keep it down. And that's all I was going to say. Hey, and I did it a couple times. And of course, they were young and they didn't listen. But it didn't bother me. So even when I went to go interject and say, hey, y'all keep it down, I didn't really care if they didn't. Nothing was broken. We're going there to make sure nobody's hurt. No one was crying. No one's bleeding. The things. But for some reason, this just bothered them. So when I said, I'll go and I'll talk to him. And I did a couple times. At one time, after all these, I'm going to go talk to the kids. Her response was, when I said I was going to do this, it was directed at my visiting aunt. And she said, referring to me, she believes in talking to her children. I kid you not. That's what she said. It wasn't said in, hey, she believes in talking to the kids. She was like, oh my gosh, she believes in talking. But anyway, let me go on. She said, my relative said, if I go, everybody getting a beating. Now my aunt, oh my God, glorious. Like, I wish that I had told her how much what she said next meant to me. And I hate that I will never get the opportunity to say this. But anyway, my aunt said, and what's wrong with talking to the kids? Now, there was a full-fledged conversation after that, but it was that question. It was that, why is what she wanted to do wrong? It was that rebuttal that made me feel, it felt like gold to me. Finally, someone in my family who didn't believe that we need to go straight to the physical form of discipline. Finally, someone in my family who was on my side. And it's interesting to note that my aunt had 2 sons. And the reason why I said that's interesting to note, because one of the things that my relatives would say, well, you have girls. And because I don't have sons, they're like, well, you can't do that with sons. But when my aunt, who has at this point, her sons were older than me, and my siblings are the oldest of my grandmother's grandchildren. So she proved, that you don't have to beat your sons. Now, I'm not saying that my cousins didn't, but she also believed in talking to your children. Now, I didn't go into great detail and say, well, how did you discipline your children? But because of what she said, it made me feel good. Because nobody in my family in South Carolina supported me. We grew up, I was ostracized for refusing to continue that standard way of discipline. Because we grew up with hard beatings. I've talked about this before. And a lot of people in the South, and especially Black people, can relate to this. We were beaten with, switches, combs, shoes. Y'all remember that white rod from the wire hangers? They would take that off, hit us with that, belts, whatever they could get their hands on. I have been slapped. Yeah, just like walk up to you and slap you in the face by adults in my family. I've never done that with my children. My children have no idea what that is like. And I'm proud of that. I am proud that they have no idea what that's like. Now, my cousins, most of my cousins, I won't say all just because I've never done a poll, and I don't want to say, oh, this is how all of them are. But just based on their social media and, some of the conversations, a lot of my cousins still believe that this is the proper way to raise a child. But anyway, so one of my cousins on social media frequently would post videos of parents, particularly Black parents, beating their child. And I usually steer clear of those videos and comments, but for some reason, this particular day, I just saw it and I was like, I am so sick of this kind of stuff. So I'm reading the comments, and it's mostly my cousins from all over who were applauding that parent for doing the right thing and getting to that child's behind. They probably didn't say behind, but like I said, I don't curse. And it took a lot for me to refute them online. It was like, they already think that, I'm crazy for not wanting to hit my kids, but it just bothered me, y'all. I don't know why this particular day. I usually just scroll past this mess, but this particular, I was like, I can't. And it took a lot for me to refute them online because I knew all my cousins were going to come for me. Now, this, of course, was many years, after that incident with my aunt, and the kids at that time probably were teenagers. Side note, most of my relatives, my first cousins, we all had kids around the same time. So our children all are about the same age. So when I say they were teenagers, my kids were teenagers, that means theirs were 2. So no longer dealing with small children. But anyway, so in the comment section, I posted a picture. Now, you may have seen this picture on the internet. It's of a former slave, his back with the whips from the slave owner. And it's just, his back is covered in whelps. And I posted that in the comment section of this post with this parent beating their child. And I said, when I see videos of us, meaning Black people, beating our children, this is an image I think about. And I don't think we need to beat our children to make them productive members of society. And I said something more along that line, that there's other cultures in the world who don't use beating to discipline their children. They don't do it. There are other cultures, so it is possible. Because I know that, like I said, they've come for me for years. And the son of my aunt from New York agreed with me in the comments. And I just smiled when I read his comment. I wanted to reach out and say, you have no idea how much I appreciated your mother. Like, he wasn't even there. He probably didn't know anything about, my aunt probably didn't even bring it up. But I never forgot it, as you can see. And when I saw his comment and he was agreeing with me, it was like, oh man, you get it. I mean, I don't know. I mean, perhaps my parenting method is why my family is having a difficult time seeing my children succeed, because that wasn't supposed to happen. And I'll discuss their predictions in a different episode. This way of discipline is now called gentle parenting. And I was called that, or referred to that by a coworker just the other day, 2023. So we were discussing, I was talking to a coworker and we were discussing his role with his teenage coworkers. Okay. Now he's a young leader and he was frustrated with the teenagers who were socializing during their shift. And I responded that they needed to be redirected. Now, just a side note, a lot of the younger leaders that I work with will come to me and say, hey, what do you think I should do? How do you think I should handle it? Like I said, a lot of people come to me with advice, and I've been told by several people, several leaders who say you're really easy to talk to and you give good advice. So it's not uncommon for the young leaders to come and say, and he wasn't actually coming to me for advice. He was just expressing his frustration. But I'm 48. I give advice when not asked. And it depends on the situation. He and I have that kind of relationship where we can't. But anyway, so he's a young leader. He was frustrated with the teenagers who were socializing. And I said, you know what? I said, they need to be redirected. And I gave him some advice on how to redirect them and how to keep them on task. And he said, he rolled his eyes. He's like, that's called gentle parenting. Now, he doesn't have any children. And I just smiled. Now, I'm new to the term. I heard it maybe a year or so ago. And I'll do an episode just on gentle parenting later because I've gotten more information about it over the last year or so. And it is literally, I won't say literally, it is almost identical to how I raised my kids. And I love it. I also saw an episode on the Breakfast Club that I want to share when I do the episode. But anyway, later. Anyway, but when I told him he needs to redirect them, he said redirecting them and keeping them on task sounds like babysitting. And I agreed with him, and then reminded him that these teenagers were in fact still children. But honey, I took my compliment and told him that I was going to talk about it on one of my podcasts, and I am true to my word. Here we are talking about it. Now, this gentle parenting isn't how I was raised, nor to date that I believe, unless these people have changed, knowing my family believes in it either, except my sibling. But I'm glad that at some point in my parenting that I embraced it. And I'm happy that my parenting style is being used in the workplace. And guess what, y'all? It works. It works. It makes me smile. Like Mary J. Blige says in the theme song of my life, just fine, honey. I like what I see when I'm looking at me, when I'm walking past the mirror. Don't stress through the night. At a time of my life, I ain't worried about if you feel it. Got my head on straight. I got my vibe right. I ain't gonna let you kill it. You see, I wouldn't change my life. My life's just fine. Meet me on the other side of 45's podcast, website, Instagram, Facebook, and still tinkering with the TikTok. I'm not sure. But new episodes will release every Monday. Thank you for tuning in. Please rate the podcast 5 stars on Apple Podcasts so others can find it. Well, any podcast actually platform. I don't know why I would say Apple, but it helps me grow my podcast. Your feedback and support are appreciated. If you want to share your story and be a guest on the podcast, please email me at host, HOST, at theothersideof45.com. And just to let you know, I have 3 interviews coming up. One is a interview that I'm doing with a young woman who is hard of hearing. The episode will be a video episode. We recorded it already. We've got to re-record some things because she's hard of hearing. It was hard for the audio to pick her up, but she has a great story. It has to be a video episode simply because she is going to use American Sign Language while she speaks because she's hard of hearing. So I am still working on to make sure that the audio can be heard. She has a very low voice. So it was hard for the audio to pick up everything. We are working through the kinks. We will probably have to re-record the episode, and that's okay. I heard from her. She said, fine, we can re-record it. I sent it to her, but I'm very excited about that particular interview. She's a great young woman. I will let you know when we get the kinks worked out. So it will be in May. The other side note is, y'all, why is Mary J. Blige coming to concert on May 12th in Atlanta? For real. Yes. The Just Fine lady. Should I go? That's a question. Should I go?